Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And we're continuing the photography education series on this channel with part 2 of the video covering the cameras and lenses that I recommend that you consider if you're stepping into photography as a business or as a serious hobby. All of this content was recorded as one video and it wound up being incredibly long. So we broke it up into 2 parts. Part 1 covered the cameras and the integral tech inside of the cameras. Part 2 will cover the lenses that I recommend, specifically also the lenses that I recommend for certain genres of photography and which lenses you should purchase and in what order. So I do want to mention before we dive in the video today that in the description below will be a link to all of the gear that we talk about both in part 1 and in part 2 on B&H Photo's website. I am not sponsored by B&H Photo. I do not get financially compensated for that list, but I have purchased most of my gear from them over the years. They're a great company, so I do recommend that you check out their website and look at all the gear in the links below. So check out part 1 if you have not seen that or you're new to the channel. Welcome. You can look at the card above and that will take you to part 1 when you're done with this video. Otherwise, welcome to part 2 where we talk about lenses. If you are trapped on an island with a coconut and a choice of a lens, this is the lens that you want, hands down. It's the Canon EF 24-70mm f2.8 Mark II ultra soft motor lens. Let me explain all of that if you're new to photography and going, whoa, what's all that Sanskrit? Because I don't understand this. So first and foremost, this is a zoom lens. It's the EF lineup of lenses. It's zoom lens. So the focal length of 24-70mm, you can bounce between those two. That is the primary reason why I recommend this lens, because no matter what kind of genre of photography you're stepping into, families, babies, weddings, product photography, flower photography, landscape photography, bizarre photography, creepy photography, candy, tasty, pretty, whatever it is, that 24-70 is going to be able to provide every type of frame you would look for. If you're photographing a wedding, you can photograph an intimate close-up portrait of the bride. You can photograph an entire family formal inside the location or the church. You can photograph beautiful landscape photos, flowers. You can do everything with this lens. This is hands down the lens that I recommend, but I do recommend the f2.8. This simply means that when you attach this lens to the camera will be able to open the aperture to 2.8, which means very wide with a lot of light coming into the camera. There is a cheaper version of this lens, which is the Canon EF 24-70 f4. f4, yes, that works. And it's a couple stops away and you may think, well, that's not that far away. So whatever. And I plan on photographing outside. I'm a natural light photographer. I'm just going to photograph families outside. I'm fighting the light. I don't need more light. The f4 will be just fine. I can save some dollars. You are correct. You can save dollars that way. But if you're starting this as a business or as a serious hobby, I promise you, you're going to take that family out into the field, gorgeous sunset, you get these beautiful photos with that f4, and then they're going to say, can we go inside our house and photograph in front of the fireplace because I want that picture too. You're really going to want that 2.8. Also, the 2.8, if this is the only lens that you purchase, allows another type of photography to be captured in a stronger way, and that is called shallow depth of field. So when you photograph somebody, you lock the focus field onto their eye. Their eye and their face will be tack sharp, but then everything behind them falls out of focus. When you're at f2.8, when you're at 3.2, even at f4 to a degree, the wider, the bigger you can open your aperture, the more of that shallow depth of field, the more of that fall off. If you've ever seen a photograph of somebody at night standing in front of a city and all the city lights are big, colorful, beautiful circles of light and color, that's called bokeh. That's achieved by that shallow depth of field. It's achieved because the sensor or the aperture is wide open. So having the option of f2.8 on this lens is going to save you more often than not. It's going to enable more photography for you. This lens in the Canon description, and anybody who's ever owned this lens, they will use this word. It's called a workhorse. I have a 24-70 Mark I that I've had since the beginning of my career long ago that I used for everything for years. And then I bought the Mark II a few years ago. The Mark I to Mark II, there is a noticeable, a very significant difference between the optics of those two. The light, the color, everything is better. So look at the Canon EF 24-70 f2.8, the second version of this lens. And any lens that you look at, I strongly recommend that you look at the most updated version of the lens. It's the same thing as looking at the most updated version of the processor inside of the camera. You want the most current version of that lens. The next lens that I use on the regular for portrait work and something that I do recommend is the Canon EF 85 f1.4 image stabilized ultra soft motor lens. The ultra soft motor just simply means there's a little motor inside that helps to balance the different lenses, the different glass inside, so that as you're taking the photograph, it'll be a little bit sharper. Image stabilization is built into this one, so again, that motor helps you to keep the image in focus by actually moving the glass just ever so slightly. f1.4. This allows for a very wide open aperture. Now, there are 3 different versions of this lens. There's the 1.8, the 1.4, and the 1.2. The 1.2 is the most expensive. The 1.8 is significantly cheaper than this price point, but I would not recommend it because ultimately at 1.8, there is a noticeable difference between 2.8 and 1.8 for sure, but it's very minimal. The difference between 1.8 and 1.4 to me, especially for the type of artwork that I'm trying to capture specifically with this lens, is a significant difference. I really do like the 1.4. The optics are better. The options for more artistic imagery is better. This is a great lens to use. But if you're just starting out in the business, you're just starting out on that hobby, as seriously in that hobby, spending a lot of money on it, I would definitely recommend the R6, then the R, then the RP, and I would recommend this lens first. The 85 is one that I use. If you can't afford this price point, you can also look at the Sigma alternative. Sigma is a company that makes lenses for both Canon, Nikon, and Sony. They're a great company to work with. I have never owned one of them, and I've never photographed with one of them, not because I think Sigma is icky and yucky. I've just never had one. I've always had Canon cameras. However, I have a bunch of friends that I absolutely admire and trust and respect their opinions. They do have the Sigma 85 1.4 lens, and they absolutely love it. They say the pictures are tack sharp, the color is amazing, and so forth. This is an alternative to save $500 with the Sigma 85 1.4 f1.4. DG probably stands for image stabilization, digital gripping the picture so it's stabilized. HSM, I don't know what it means. So look at either the Canon 85 1.4 or the Sigma 1.4. Now, the next 2 lenses we're going to talk about, these are lenses that I do own and I have used for years in my business as a portrait photographer. But I put them at the end of these recommendations because I no longer currently use them. I very rarely am I in a situation where I will use these lenses. This one, the Canon EF 16-35 f2.8 Mark III. I had the Mark I. No, I had the Mark II. USM. This is a wide-angle lens. Why would you want a wide-angle lens? If you're going to photograph weddings, eventually you're going to photograph a group of people called the family formal inside of a location like a church. To be able to get everybody into it and get a beautiful frame, you're going to have to back up if you have the 24-70. So you're, instead of standing about 6 to 7 feet from a subject, which is typically the distance you would stand from a typical one-person portrait client, you're going to have to back up a lot, which means you're going to potentially get the flashes and the lights that are in the way and ultimately cause some issues in your framing. With a 16-35, you can still stand about 8 feet from the people and get several people into the frame because it's an extreme wide angle lens. If you want to step into landscape photography, this is going to service you rather well. With wide angle lenses, there's one drawback, and it's at the edges of every frame. Due to the convex nature of the glass inside the lens, all of the pictures on the edges are going to be distorted because it's just the shape of the glass that's capturing that photo. But in Photoshop, you can overcome those issues. We talk about that in the retouching series on this channel. So if you're new to the channel, welcome to the adventure. Look at the card above. After you're done with this video, that'll take you to the retouching series. Look at the video where we talk about processing images in Adobe Camera Raw. There's an option that you can check that will overcome that distortion in wide-angle lenses. So wide-angle lenses do have a myriad of uses in portrait photography. For myself, I don't really use them anymore. I do photograph landscapes, but it's more for stock images, for fantasy composites, and I just use my 24-70 for that. I do not use my wide angle. I would use my wide angle lens when I would photograph real estate because you would need that widest angle because you're only getting one picture of a room. You can't take several of it because it's not a fun photo shoot. It's just one picture. So look at a wide angle lens. The next lens that I would recommend is the Canon EF 70-200 f2.8 image stabilized Mark III ultra soft motor lens. This is called a telephoto lens. I use this lens all the time in my career when I was photographing weddings and high school seniors, when you photograph pets and so forth. Why would you need this lens? Because it can zoom in to 200 millimeters. That's a significant distance. If you're photographing weddings, imagine the bride walks over to her father, hugs him and says, "Daddy, I love you." You don't want to be standing right next to them 6 feet away with a 24-70 going, "You guys are doing great. That was a beautiful moment." You want your 70 to 200 at distance so that you are not interrupting the storytelling in those moments. I'm sorry, I'm just imagining that moment happening now. I'm being like, "Do you mind if I have some of your cake?" Yeah, the bride and groom, they're eating their cake and you're right up on it with a 70 to or a 24 to 70 or a 16 to 35. Like, the cake, it's tasty, isn't it? Click. No, you don't want that. You want a 70 to 200. You need that distance away from the client. If you're going to photograph action, high school senior sports, basketball game, it's the same thing. You don't want to be on the court with a 24 to 70 right next to the kid as he dunks the ball, because it's like, "Oh wow, you hit me with the ball." No, you don't want that. You need to be in the stands or on the sidelines with a 70 to 200. I'm sorry, I think these are really funny. So the 70 to 200 is going to be able to give you great options at that focus. Also, if you're photographing pets out in the wild, this is going to let you do that. If you're photographing pets in a studio and you need to get distance from an angry little furry one, this is what's going to give you that option. I put it at the end of these recommendations because I have one, I just don't use it anymore. And I did use it when I did high school senior portraits, but ultimately I just didn't care for the picture because, truth be told, I couldn't keep my hands steady enough because I had focus fields that I had to use, so I had to reframe my shots instead of having that auto eye detection that is now in the Canon R, R5, R6, and the Canon RP. So look at this lens for all those different options we talked about. But here's my full lineup of lenses and how I would recommend. It depends on what kind of business you want to step into. If you're going to step into wedding photography, my first recommendation is the 24 to 70. And then the next lens I would recommend is the 70 to 200. Because if you're photographing weddings inside of a church, chances are you have to be at the back of the house. So you need that 200 millimeters to be able to get that distance. Then the next lens I would recommend you purchase for weddings is the 16 to 35, and then finally landing on the 85 millimeter lens. If you're stepping into general portrait photography, families, babies, high school senior portraits, headshots, like corporate headshots and so forth, you want the 24 to 70, and then you want the 85 potentially for some more artistic pictures. Then these others, if you want to do anything else, but ultimately, high school senior portrait, kids standing out in the field, sunset, beautiful field of flowers. You don't need a wide angle lens for that. You can get a 24 millimeter frame for that. But if you want the 16 millimeter, go for it. One of the problems, and I'm going to step into this right now, is when you're stepping into photography as a business, every photographer has a meme about this. They'll tell you the joke about it. You get caught up in wanting all the things. You go to photography convention when COVID doesn't exist anymore and everybody has every lens known to man, and you'll want those things. You'll want new toys because you'll think that with this new lens, I can take photos. I already have the 24 to 70, but with the 16 by 35, I can take photos. You can take pictures with the 24 to 70. It isn't the photography that's limited, it's you that's limited with your vision. And I say that with all due respect because I was a person at the beginning of our career that purchased gear that ultimately we didn't need. Now, thankfully, although it caused me a lot of stress and sleepless nights, we didn't have a lot of money back then when we started our business, so I couldn't run out and buy every new toy that I heard mentioned or saw or put my hands on. Start with that 24 to 70 for general portraiture, then move into the 85. If you're looking for weddings, you're looking for action sports, you're looking for pet photography out in the wild, animal photography out in the wild, then I would definitely recommend look at the 24 to 70, then the 70 to 200. If you're looking for headshots, the 24 to 70 is going to take care of that. Again, that's general portraiture. So, and one of the final lenses is not in here though. If you're going to step into weddings or you want to step into like landscapes, plants and so forth, you would look at a macro lens, and that's where you can get the lens incredibly close to a subject and get full focus. So like the bouquet with the wedding rings on it, that's a macro lens that's going to get that really beautiful shot where the ring looks huge in the picture and you have that really incredible shallow depth of field of the flowers falling out of focus. You can also get something similar with the 24 to 70. I did it for years. I have never owned a macro lens. I photographed with one many different times and ultimately and they're not that expensive. They're like $400 or $500. I just never bought one because ultimately I could get almost the same photo with my 24 to 70. So to finish up this video, I do want to talk about kit lenses. kits in general. So you're looking at these price points and you go, hey, I just saw a box with a Canon on it at Costco or at Best Buy or Walmart or wherever. It's Canon Rebel something, and it's $600. And it comes with a camera and a lens and a bag and a card and a strap and a sticker, and it's all cool. Those kits, we talked about this in the previous video on the photography education series. So if you're new to the channel, welcome again, and look at the card above after you're done with this one. That will take you to the previous video that talks about lighting gear that I recommend. There's a certain inalienable truth when you purchase technology, and it's you pay for what you get. With a kit, that's absolutely true. The Canon Rebel line and so forth, the Canon 80D, these are generally crop sensors. What does crop sensor mean? Well, a full frame sensor is that entire square, and that's a big rectangle, not square, rectangle. With a crop sensor, that easily is cropped down by a third. The quality of the sensor, the quality of the processor is not nearly as good in a crop sensor camera. The kit lenses that come with it, they're made of plastic. They don't have glass inside, it's plastic. And sometimes they are APS-C lenses. That's the name of the sensor. APS-C is a crop sensor. They will only work with that camera. They cannot be attached to a camera that is meant as an EF mount. If you were starting out, if you're a parent and you have a child that says they're interested in photography and you don't want to break the bank because, with all due respect, you think this is just a little passing hobby that 2 months from now they're never going to use that camera, they'll use it once a year, then look at a kit like this. This is on B&H Photo's website. It's the Canon EOS M50. It's a kit that comes with a 15 to 45 millimeter lens and a 55 to 200 millimeter lens. This is essentially a wide angle lens, and then you have a lens that can telephoto and zoom in. Now, let's talk about why this is not a good purchase if you're serious about it as a hobby or as a business. Because first and foremost, this little lens right here, this means that the lowest f-stop this lens can go to is 3.5, and the highest f-stop it can go to is 6.3. It cannot go any higher, it cannot go any lower. That's incredibly limiting. It is an image stabilized camera, or lens, excuse me, and 55 to 200 you can zoom in. That's probably an f4 lens, I don't know. It's not written on the site, so we can't see it, and I don't want to go down the description to find out. At $829, if you're a parent looking to buy a camera for your kid, look at the RP. It's $1,000, yes, it's just for the camera. But you can purchase what's called a Nifty 50. It's a Canon EF 50 millimeter lens. It's a prime lens, only focuses at 50 millimeters. Doesn't have image stabilization in it. It's not limited by the f-stops in it. It's $125. It's a simple little lens. Buy them the RP and buy them the Nifty 50. And if they just ditch it all, then you have a really great camera that will last for a very long time. And the price point was a hop, skip, and a jump from this one. Now, this is a mirrorless camera, so it's got some stuff going for it. It's got 24 megapixels in it. It's an APS-C sensor, which means it's a crop sensor. But look at the megapixel count. This refers back to what I was talking about earlier, where ultimately megapixels isn't necessarily the driving force anymore. It has the same image processor inside of it as the RP and the R. It's that sensor being limited. The processor is great. The sensor is limited. The lenses are limited. They're not of the best quality that you can get. And for a price point at $829, with these lenses, knowing that they're really not that great, you can invest another $170 and get the RP and get a fantastic camera. And then just find some lenses, either find used lenses at camera stores or consider purchasing the Nifty 50 and then moving on from there. Last thing I want to talk about really quickly, when the Canon EOS R lineup came out, they also launched a new series of lenses called the RF series of lenses. So this Canon EF is the old mount to DSLRs, and they will work with the Canon R, the Canon RP, the R5, and the R6, because the Canon R, RP, R5, R6, they ship with a free adapter. I think when I got my camera, it came with a free adapter. I'm pretty sure they still ship with it. It's a free adapter that you attach to the bottom of an EF lens that lets it mount to the R, the RP, the R5, the R6, because these new cameras are made for the RF series of lenses. Now, I have photographed with some RF lenses. I've talked to folks that I trust and admire and respect. There is a difference between the RF and the EF. I have not had enough experience with the RF to EF to definitively say if that's a significant difference or marginal, but there is a difference. One of the major things with the RF lenses is that they are centered and positioned toward filmmakers. They have control wheels on the outside of them that can be programmed. So where the focus wheel, where you would turn it to make the lens in focus, both in the film days and in DSLR, that ring can be reprogrammed to be other functions like ISO settings, aperture settings inside the camera. That is beneficial to filmmakers first, photographers second. So the RF glass is positioned toward filmmaking. It has image stabilization built into it. But with that image stabilization paired with the new R5 and the new R6, Canon for the first time has now put image stabilization in the camera body itself. It's called IBIS, or in-body image stabilization. So with IBIS turned on and the image stabilization between the RF lens, filmmakers now can handhold the camera during tracking shots, during moving shots for film. Right now they use rigs that are called gimbals and steadicams and stabilizers so that when the camera moves forward, it's a very steady frame on the outside. They can now do that with IBIS and image stabilization, hand-holding it, sorry about hitting the microphone there, which is an important thing to them. But there's some field testing that's going on right now because, again, the R5, R6 were just announced a couple weeks ago, and they've only been in the hands of a few select folks across the world for the past month. So more testing is needed. If that's a deciding factor for you on buying RF glass or the R5 or R6, look for that research in the future. I'm certainly looking for it. For me, I am purchasing the Canon R5 when it comes out, and I will probably be purchasing it at the end of the year. And I do have the intention of purchasing RF lenses for it because filmmaking is important to me. It's a next step for me in certain parts of my business with Reality Reimagined. I do recommend, though, the R6 for anybody who's serious about photography as a business, as a hobby, and for filmmaking. And to recap, go for that 24-70, then the 85, 70-200 for the different situations we talked about today. So let's finish up this video and have some final thoughts. My final thoughts are going to be brief because this video has been really long, and it's simply this: spend your dollars wisely. Be patient, ask yourself, what is the application of photography that you want to go into, the genres of photography that you want to cover? How serious about it are you? Don't break the bank, but I encourage you to spend as much dollars as you can toward the best gear, because that gear right now with the technology, with the options that are available, will carry you forward for years. The cameras were constantly evolving too fast in the past. Now you're landing, as you saw, in different versions of cameras that had the same processor. So look at that Canon R6, look at the R and the RP and those lenses, invest your dollars wisely. Make good decisions with this, and get started on the journey of photography. If you liked the content you found in today's video, make sure to give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel because new content comes out each week in photography and Photoshop education. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.